College football nerds here talking A&M and LSU. They had a wacky one last year, and the rules, I'm laying them out right now, Josh. The rules for this discussion and in the comments are last year doesn't count. It does not count. These teams are totally different, more so on the LSU side. We're too late in this season to reference last year. It will not impact this year. Does not count. Now that I've got that off my chest, in the comments, let us know about this year, what you think the score is going to be, and use this year's data, not last year's. Also want to remind y'all, we have an audio version of this show. If you are kind of new to us or haven't realized this in the past, we do publish on iTunes and Android platforms, usually same day, sometimes day after. Sometimes I'm slacking. This week we're a day late because I was sick. All right, Josh. So we've been defending A&M on Twitter, for better or worse. And we said that A&M's not ranked, but you've got teams like App State, teams like Memphis, and Cincinnati that are ranked. A&M's losses are to Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, and then maybe they're going to lose, maybe they're going to win against LSU. But my point is, I think A&M is a lot better team than their win-loss record or rankings shown. And if you give them one of these ranked team schedules, they look a lot better. So it's hard to know sometimes who you're getting in A&M because their schedule's been so dang brutal. I forgot Clemson. That basically the criticism of A&M is we'll just beat somebody. But then it's like, okay, you're saying I have to beat the number 1, 3, 4, or 5 team in the country before you'll say I'm the 25th best team in the country? That's ridiculous. You got anything to say about that?
So I do have something to say about that, and it's something that I said on our Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at CFB Nerds, but we do tend to put out a lot of our more interesting statistics these days on Twitter because we always dig them up throughout the week, and then we just say them to each other and they disappear into the ether. I did an interesting comparison of Cincinnati and Texas A&M. So Cincinnati, as of last week, they were number 17. The college football playoff hasn't come out yet with its rankings this week, so I don't know where they're going to end up now, but probably not really following any. Cincinnati has one win over a top 50 team. Citing SP Plus here, just a solid objective 1 through 130 metric. That's number 18 UCF. And UCF themselves only have one win over a top 50 team. That's number 46 Temple. Cincinnati has not beaten any top 75 team by more than 14 points. All those, one game, and there were a couple others that were in the 50 to 75 range, were all within 2 scores. And Cincinnati had 3 less than 2 score wins over non-top 75 teams. That was number 107 East Carolina, number 92 Tulsa, number 91 South Florida. Those are not good teams. So when you put it all together, what you have is a Cincinnati team that really has beaten one team that you would even remotely call good. That one team that you would call good would be UCF. UCF themselves has not been that great this year. They've lost. And their only even remotely good win is number 46 Temple. Compare that to Texas A&M. Again, one top 50 win for Cincinnati, one top 50 win for Texas A&M, number 41 South Carolina. Maybe not as good as UCF. That's probably a little bit debatable. However, South Carolina actually has proved themselves. They beat number 5 Georgia, number 49 Kentucky. Central Florida has only beaten number 46 Temple. Texas A&M has 2 14-point or greater wins over top 75 teams. They beat USC, that is South Carolina, not the Trojans, 30-6. And number 54, Miss State. They also blew them out. Moreover, Texas A&M in their non-top 75 teams, Arkansas was the only close game. That was early in the season. That was when Arkansas actually, gave a crap, was playing decent football in a little bit of a weird game. When you look it down that way and you march through and say, what have you actually accomplished? A&M has accomplished everything Cincinnati's accomplished. They have far worse, nasty, ugly wins over really bad teams. The only thing going against them is the fact that they have to play, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 5, number 6. That's A&M's problem. So I think A&M is a very good team. I think they're an underrated team. I think they're something like number 17 right now in ESPN's SP+. It's just that they have a bad record because they're playing top 10 teams. And if you were to look at a team like App State, I don't see how they would do any different.
Well, it's not just that they have a bad record. There's a couple of other things that concern us about Texas A&M, and this is where we kind of branch off in our discussion of, are you a top 25 team versus are you a team that can beat LSU? Because there's a difference. In watching that Georgia game, I got so frustrated, and A&M fans probably won't take this as me bashing them, bashing their team, because they've lived this reality. Speaking of our Twitter, I tweeted a Twitter tweet today, and it was basically that this is every important game under Jimbo Fisher at A&M. They are trash offensively for 2.5 quarters. Absolutely inept, cannot complete a dump-off pass in the flats, inept for 2.5 quarters. They play bend but don't break defense for the most part. Decent, not terrible defense for the most part. Get some stops, but get in a big enough hole that they're resulting last quarter and a half where Kellen Mond is making throws out of his mind and they're scoring points. The hole's too big for them to dig themselves out of, but the score is respectable. That's every single game under A&M, except for the game, I don't want to give away any spoilers, this year that I think this one's going to look like. So we've talked about the good teams that A&M's played this year. And we're thinking, okay, is this going to be a one-score Auburn game? Because Auburn played LSU close. Is this going to be a one-score Georgia game? Because, 19-13 is pretty respectable. I think this is going to be more like the Alabama game than it was like those other games. And since we already talked about it, so it's cheating, you agree with me. So why don't you tell people who are listening why I think that?
We talk a lot in the show about how college football often has issues with scaling and it has issues with thresholds. And teams have to hit a certain point to be able to effectively move the ball and score points. And if they can cross that threshold, they can score a lot of points. And if they can't cross the threshold, they won't score many at all. When you look at A&M's record through this year and the teams that were able to put up more, 30 plus points on them, that list is pretty darn short. It happened against Alabama. It happened against Mississippi State. Those teams scored 30 points on Texas A&M. Nobody else did, not even Clemson. I feel like I'm missing somebody, but I'm not, because it seems so absurd. So Mississippi State was at 6.37 yards per play. Alabama was at 6.89. Nobody else was able to cross the 6 yard per play threshold. Even Clemson with their offense, which has played better later, not so good at the beginning of the season, was at 5.7 yards per play. And I think what you saw was that if you can hold somebody to 5.5 to 6 yards per play, and you're playing a bend but don't break style of defense, which allows teams to have a higher yard per play, but it makes it hard for them to get at chunk plays. And the whole goal is you get aggressive at the right point, and you wait and you wait and you bide your time. And as soon as they make a mistake and they've got a 2nd and 12, they go 5 yards, and it's 4th and 2, and they end up punting. And that's been A&M's style of defense, and it's been pretty effective for a lot of the year, except for the couple times, which was Mississippi State. A lot of that was late, I should say. But especially the Alabama game where they were giving up actual good yardage, more like the 7 to 8 yard per play range, I would say, for Alabama. When Alabama was actually playing with their starters, they got up enough where they did pull their starters in that game. LSU offensively, we've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm not 100% sold on how they compare it against Alabama, if they're necessarily better or worse than Alabama was with Tua. But the point here, at least for this discussion, is that's pretty academic. LSU's offense is a lot better than the other teams that Texas A&M's played. They're a lot better than anybody else in the Southeastern Conference. When you look at the Southeastern Conference and its offensive totals, there are two teams, as we said in our Iron Bowl discussion, that are leading the pack by a good margin. LSU and Alabama are tied at 7.95 yards per play. Ole Miss is a distant third at 6.06. Auburn is a distant fourth at 5.7. And that's in terms of yards per game. Auburn's obviously all the way down in 10th in yards per play because Auburn has more total yardage. They run more plays. This is why you use yards per play, which I forgot to filter when I was talking to you. Florida is the third best offense at 6.4 yards per play. Still, again, 1.5 yards per play is a big deal. That's the differentiator between LSU, Alabama, and everybody else. 1.5 yards when you're looking at Texas A&M is the difference between, for example, an Ole Miss that scored 17 points and an Alabama pretty much dead on that scored 47. That's why LSU is such a threat. That's why I think this game is going to resemble more the Alabama game than any other Texas A&M game. It's because LSU is likely to put up that 6.5 to 7 yard per attempt total. And if you're able to do that and you're able to do it efficiently against a bend but don't break defense, you will consistently march down the field and score points. And they will know that. Texas A&M's coaching staff will adjust. They will get more aggressive, and then you end up starting to see explosive plays that A&M has not generally given up this year.
And that was a long explanation, but it's gotten merit because there are nuances in this team that they're facing versus some of the other ones this year, and it's interesting because A&M has really impressed me defensively this year, and I know Georgia's not a good offensive team right now, and Georgia fans might disagree, but you're wrong. I mean, the proof is in what we've actually seen on the field. Clemson probably wasn't an elite offensive team at the beginning of the year, but they still, they put up 24 points on A&M, but it was a couple of hero passes that frankly should have been intercepted. Now, I still think Clemson's a better team than A&M, but they've shown defensively they can do good enough against most decent offenses. They could not against Alabama, but most cannot against Alabama. That Alabama team is going to score 40 on anybody. Good defense, bad defense, doesn't matter. LSU is in that same realm offensively. I do think that where we give A&M, we give them hell for struggling for most of the game offensively. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case against LSU. I think they're going to score some points. And that's why I say it's going to look more like the Alabama game that I think was 47-20, not 13-0 or whatever with Georgia. Do you think that's fair to say that they're probably going to score some points?
I think it is fair to say. The curiosity with Texas A&M the beginning of the year, and I think it was going into the Alabama game, we had this discussion that against Clemson, against Auburn, against Arkansas, they were really struggling to break that 30-point threshold, and they were that way all the way to the Mississippi State game. Really, it was only Texas State and Lamar that they crossed 30 points. They were right at 31 with Arkansas. But the thing is, that Mississippi State game, even I would say the South Carolina in the UTSA game, they were at 30 to 50 points. And that's a little encouraging from A&M because now they've shown some signs that they will actually put up pretty good numbers in terms of point totals, regardless of opposing defenses. That was a problem for them by midseason. Arkansas is obviously an atrocious defense, and they couldn't put up more than 30.
I think A&M fans are probably going to point to the fact that LSU gave up 38 to a good running quarterback. They might have a better running quarterback in Kellen Mond, but I would counter with, one, yes, Kellen Mond can run really well, but two, Jimbo Fisher doesn't let him run. And it seems like he will finally let him run, like an obligatory run, after they're down by 2 touchdowns or something, and it's late in the game. But for whatever reason, he doesn't want, as a function of his offense, the quarterback to run and then exploit the defense off of that. Is it also fair to say, or do you agree that the running that Kellen Mond is allowed to do is far different from the running that Plumlee did against LSU?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, he only had 9 carries in the Georgia game. That, of course, counts sacks. Only 10 carries in South Carolina. Now, he wasn't effective in the Georgia game. He had negative yardage. Again, sacks are a part of all that. But like the Auburn games, 28-20, he had 9 carries. I mean, they just aren't really letting him run the ball. I don't know if he doesn't want to run the ball or if it's just, maybe at play calling, the offensive style. It hasn't been a tool in their arsenal. And I think it could be if they had designed an offense with, and it doesn't even have to be zone read, but with an actual like quarterback run components as a function of the offense. And it's really more like a quarterback draw, traditional passing offense concepts with a quarterback run, not a quarterback run based offense. Does that make sense that it's not really a function of the offense or part of the scheme?
Yeah, we have it in the other quarterback on the other side of the field. It's Joe Burrow. I mean, he's an athletic quarterback. He's sneaky fast. He's not super fast, but a lot of his like 3rd and 12 conversions are from really solid runs where it's either a QB draw or his ability to use his legs, and he knows he has that freedom instead of trying to read the third progression down the sideline and drop it in a bucket, which is what Mond does 1 out of 17 tries, with the other 16 are killing drives. And this is a perfect example of this was in the Alabama game when LSU needed, I think it was like a really tight game in the fourth quarter, and LSU needed a drive, a conversion on his third down, second down, something like that. And he started to run like a QB draw, deked, and then dropped a pass in because the entire defense reacted to it. And I think this is just part of Jimbo Fisher being really stubborn. It's really disappointing because his offense is really effective for a specific quarterback who has a specific skill set, but that's not where we are in 2019, and that's not what he has right now. He has a guy that is ultra talented, and he's not utilizing him properly. But let's see what the numbers say about this game, and then we can kind of wrap it up off of that.
So, and I think everybody that's watching the show at this point in the season is probably familiar with it. We do a statistical model. That model looks at per-play statistics for each team, and it's designed to give you a baseline. If both teams play their B-plus game, they play against each other based off your performance on the field relative to the strength of your competition. What does that B-plus team game sort of translate? What is basically the relative strength of this game, of your team in this game in terms of yardage? And then we look at that performance, we look at your own past history, and say, okay, with these thresholds, with this sort of level of performance, what kind of score do we get? It's not, people talk about like yards per play, and are you looking at just points per yard? No, it's a much more fluid, high end, low end. There's a point where teams shut down. There's a point where teams explode kind of style that the scoring model takes into account. So skipping through all the boring bits, Texas A&M has a good defense. They're not a whole lot more than good. 86% of opponent rushing averages, 86% of opponent passing averages. LSU is 84% of opponent rushing averages, about the same as Texas A&M, and 97% of opponent passing averages. That number continues to baffle me. I mean, LSU has every reason to be a much better pass defense than they are. I think a lot of it is the direct lack of a direct pass rush, the lack of the ability to contain the edge. We saw that with Ole Miss in their run game. But, the run defense is actually pretty solid. I would say they took one step forward in run defense from last year, and they took 2.5 steps back in pass defense. Whereas A&M, I think, kind of did the opposite. They took one step back in run defense, where they were phenomenal in run defense last year. And we often made the point with them and Missouri both that their run defense was in the 50% range. They were kind of grossly underrated, but their pass defense was awful. It was like 120%. I mean, they weren't just giving up opponent averages. They were giving up well past opponent averages. You were having your best day of the year playing A&M through the air, even though you couldn't run the ball, which is kind of unusual that you can stop somebody from running and you still, even though you can make them one-dimensional, you still can't stop them. I'd say A&M took 1 or 2 steps back with the run, and they took 2 full steps forward with the pass defense. They are third in the SEC in pass defense and yards per attempt allowed, and I think a lot of people miss that fact or don't appreciate it. They are tied with Alabama at 5.9 yards per attempt, right behind Georgia at 5.6. They're a good pass defense this year, and that kind of bears it out in the stats. The problem is it's just LSU starts from such a high place that it doesn't really matter. A&M's expected to have about 3.9 yards per carry, about 6.7 yards per attempt. That's enough to put some points on the board. That's worth about 22 points for A&M. They're going to score, as Daniel, as you put it, they're going to score some points in this game. And LSU is expected to be held way under their average, about 8.78, 8.8 yards per attempt, 4.6 yards per carry. Those are not what LSU likes to have or what they're necessarily accustomed to, numbers on either side, but they're still easily enough to be effective. Again, 8.7 yards per attempt. That would be one of the lower totals of the season. Only Auburn held them to less. But with the fact that A&M's run defense did take a couple steps back, the run offense will be there for LSU. The model still predicted them to get 42 points. So you end up with a total score of LSU 42, Texas A&M 22.
And LSU fans, before you go crazy, although I think our model giving you 42 points is not going to make you too mad. That 8.8 number would be the best number that A&M gave up all year, better than Alabama. I think there is merit to the thought that A&M. So A&M, we live in a world that A&M can have a good defense. It's kind of the numbers are tracking right with Alabama's defense. Can have a good defense and still give up 42 points. Alabama has a good defense, gave up a little bit more than that to this LSU team. So I'm going to go ahead and give my score on this, and we can talk about it a little bit. The 42-22 is interesting because I had not looked at the model score before I talked about this game feeling more like the Alabama game than the others. To me, I don't think it's crazy. I did see in that game with Alabama, because I watched that game, I saw how good Alabama had to be to claw those points out of them. Like, we talked about the concerns with Mac Jones versus Auburn, where Tua could go out and get a 3rd and 11 to keep a drive going, where in any other situation that's a punt. But Tua does it 3 or 4 times in a row and has scored a few times in a row. LSU is a lot like that. We saw it against that Alabama defense. I don't think that A&M has a glaring weakness like Alabama had in Benton at middle linebacker in that game. But I am going to go with the model score. I don't usually go with a model. I usually deviate a little bit. But 42-22 feels good for me. And before you give me your score, because we haven't talked about LSU a whole lot, let's talk a little bit about for me, the 38 against Ole Miss is concerning because it wasn't just backups like Vanderbilt and it wasn't just offensive scores. But for some reason, I'm still not that bothered by it. I still feel like, to me, when LSU needs to turn it on against an Ohio State or somebody, I'm not saying they're the number one team. Because of that, I've got them number 2. But I keep seeing on Twitter, a defense like this can't win a playoff and blah, blah, blah. They're not Oklahoma 2018 that was 90-something in defense, where we said that Oklahoma team needed to be a little bit better to win a national championship. They are what we thought Oklahoma needed to be, elite offense with an okay defense. So am I crazy, or are you not as worried about it as maybe the people on Twitter are?
Yeah, so right now LSU is 43rd in the country if you factor out FCS data for everybody. In yard per play allowed. Last season, Oklahoma was 96th. As you said, the gap there between somebody in the low 40s and somebody in the mid 90s, that's a chasm, guys. And in college football, for all the talk, doesn't really have that much parity. Somebody at the top of the chain, a number 1 defense and a number 10 defense are very different. Number 10 and number 30 are very different. Number 40 and number 90 are extremely different. LSU has a pretty good defense. They're just not a whole lot more than that, and I still don't really. I can't put my finger on why. Guys like Stevens, Fulton, I think is a tremendously underrated corner. I think Stingley is very good. I think sometimes people thought I was critical in past videos, but I only was critical to the extent that I actually thought Fulton was better and was kind of forgotten because nobody throws at him a lot. They shouldn't be where they are, but they are. But 40 is not bad. And I think a lot of what happens with LSU in a lot of these games is they score so fast that maybe it puts a lot of pressure on the defense. I think they turn the ball around pretty quick to the opposing offense. I think sometimes they just have way too many possessions. I mean, the Ole Miss game was kind of a disaster when you talk about it defensively, but it's 31-7 at the half. I mean, that game was easily in control at the half. Ole Miss kind of ran the score up in the second half, but they had 8 possessions to do it. And 8 possessions and a half is a tremendous amount. Normally you get like 5, 6. I mean, Ole Miss had 6 possessions in the first half. The biggest problem for LSU was they either scored, they had one long drive, then they scored quick, then they scored quick, then they threw a pick quick, then they threw a pick quick, then they scored quick, then they scored quick. Less than 4 plays on every drive after the first drive in the second half. It was just bang, 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 bang. And Ole Miss was having, quick drives, long drives, but they were kind of wearing down LSU defensively. I think that's sort of a factor of what happens when you have this style of offense. It doesn't bother me because I think it's almost inevitable when you have an offense that's going to put 60 points in a game that you're not going to win 60-0 against a reasonably good opposing offense. They've got too many possessions. They're getting the ball too quickly. Your defense is a little too tired to be able to stop them completely. And, like you said, Daniel, they're not Oklahoma bad, but they are Oklahoma good offensively. The combination of all those things, it doesn't worry me that much. It doesn't really concern me. They still, like Arkansas, they gave up 20 points. Arkansas was not effective offensively in that game. They gave up points to Auburn, but Auburn didn't really move the ball at all. They just scored a little bit due to circumstance. That game was a lot closer on the scores. We talked about in the Iron Bowl, talking against Auburn. I'll point the same point here. LSU was about 2-1 better in yard per play, yard per attempt and yard per carry than Auburn. That game is not normally 23-20. It took a lot of things going wonky for LSU for that to even be close, and LSU still wins the game. I do think this is a higher scoring game than you do. I'll say that. I have it 52-31. And the reason for that's pretty simple. I mean, A&M throws the ball a lot, and Mond can be very effective as a passer. A&M has struggled this year more than anything when they've been in a situation where they've got to throw the ball and they're playing a pretty good opposing pass defense. Like Auburn, and they go 6.9 yards per attempt, or like what they did. Not 6.9 yards per attempt, but actually 6.8 yards per attempt. Georgia was 6.5 yards per attempt. When they've played worse pass defenses, when they played people like Mississippi State, it's 10.2. Arkansas was a bit of a low mark, but they've had some pretty good games through the air. I think they're going to get theirs, and I think they're going to be in desperation mode enough that they'll run Mond. But I still think this is going to be more like a 50-20 game at one point that they tack on a couple late touchdowns, as has been Texas A&M's modus operandi. I don't think this game is going to ever be particularly close. I think it's just going to be like a lot of LSU games where, they give up 30 points and they, again, 52-31, you're still winning by 21. You're still in a comfortable margin, and it probably is not any closer than 3 touchdowns at any point past maybe midway through the second quarter.
All right, y'all, that's going to wrap it up for our Texas A&M and LSU preview. Reminder for y'all to let us know in the comments what you think is going to happen in this game. Also, if you want to help us beyond like and subscribe, the biggest way you can help us is to share our videos, our content on your favorite platform. If it's a forum, if it's Facebook, if it's on Twitter, it helps us out a lot. So if you want to do that, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.